Welcome to the League of Extraordinary Atheists for Humanism, where we, tonight just I, attempt to apply logic and reason to religion and politics and everything in between. My wonderful, beautiful co host, Mac, cannot be with us tonight. He is extremely exhausted. He busts his butt, guys. He's a dad, he has jobs. And sometimes, you just can't. And that's just one of those nights. And as a as a human being, understanding what that feels like, yes, Mac, you go ahead and rest. He is actually in bed sleeping. He is not even probably watching. He said he will watch tomorrow. That's how tired he is. So we all love Mac. Send Mac some love in the chat because I'm sure he'll be reading it tomorrow. So his Venezuela story is going to have to wait until next week, but that gives us something to look forward to because it's actually something that I don't know, and I just can't wait. I can't wait. I'm going to read as much as I can to at least be informed on what he is talking about when he brings us the story, because this week I spent my time in Ecuador, and Ecuador was supposed to and did, I should say did have their election on the 7th of this month. Now, they have a lot of candidates. It's not like here. And so, when there are a lot more than two candidates, the percentages come in, 23%, 30%, 40%, which is a lot when you have a lot of candidates. And I am going to take you on a corrupt and successful story of Ecuador, which is very confusing but informative. I learned a lot that I am ashamed to say that I didn't know. Ecuador is not a country that we here in the States talk about. It's not talked about. And that's a shame because they are right below us. And even if they were on the other side of the planet, I would say we're on the same planet. We should know about them. And I will do my best to go through every country in South America and try to learn what's going on in these countries because they have a huge impact on not just the nations around that particular nation that I would be talking about or investigating or researching, but on us too. So, we have the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, who is always bullying nations to sign austerity clauses, and countries who have leftist policies where the resources of that nation benefit the people of that nation. Well, when a democratically elected person gets put into the highest office of the land, decides that they want to sign or side with corporate and privatizing and the IMF, well, those nations then those they lose the benefits from those resources that are their nation's resources, and international corporations reap the benefits of those resources. So, as I'm sure everyone who is here knows all of that, we're going to start with the good news first. I thought it would be important to start this way because it kind of will you'll have more knowledge when I go into the corruptness of this election and how we are a meddling election. uh Steven, I don't even know. We are meddling as no meddlers have ever meddled before in Ecuador's elections. Okay, so Ecuador's left-wing success story, which there is one, and it is actually quite remarkable. Just as we've seen when other democratically elected leaders like Chavez or any Lula, who come in and take their nation's resources and say no to other nations, especially the empire, to their corporations and say we're gonna build our country up with our resources. Whenever that happens, that's when bad things happen. So we're gonna start with Ecuador's left-wing success story. It doesn't quite fit with neoliberal orthodoxy, but President Rafael Correa has made remarkable progress. I have problems with that, however. Will the next government sustain it? Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa, he did speak at a forum in Guatemala City on August 19th, 2014. And I found this speech to be inspiring, actually. I had to read because I have never been bilingual, and it is something that I do think about more often these days, about learning to speak a second language. It would be Spanish, of course, especially living here in Florida. Okay. A shift supported and welcomed in Washington. That right there puts red flags and alarms up in my head. Latin America has been moving to the right in the last year or so. I'd say a little bit longer than that. 3 of South America's largest economies, Brazil, Argentina, and Peru, now have far right-wing presidents with close ties to Washington. And those close ties to Washington are for foreign policy and trade, of course. The standard Washington consensus narrative, while ignoring any U.S. role in the region, of course. Plausible deniability is what should be the United States of America's middle name. The consensus narrative, while ignoring any U.S. role in the region, sees the left governments that were elected in South America over the past couple of decades as having ridden a commodities boom to populist victories, with handouts to the poor and unsustainable. Sorry, I told you guys I'm dyslexic, so sometimes I have to look away to say the word. I don't know if anyone else is dyslexic. If that helps, maybe tell me so I don't. I'm not alone. Anyway, unsustainable spending. When that boom collapsed, though, the story goes, so did the finances of the left governments and therefore their political fortunes. But this is a highly exaggerated and self-serving narrative, I want you guys to know. Ecuador is a good example of how a left government achieved success over the past decade through positive and creative changes in economic policies, as well as financial, institutional, and regulatory reform protections. They put protections in. The details are also worth looking at because Ecuador's experience shows that much of the rhetoric about how globalization restricts the choices of governments to those that please international investors is also exaggerated. Big time. It turns out that even a relatively small, middle-income developing country can adopt workable alternative policy options if people can elect a government that is independent and responsible enough to use them. The results for the decade of left governments in Ecuador, 2007 to 2016, include a 38% reduction in poverty. That's a little less than 10 years. That's extraordinary. A 47% reduction in extreme poverty. Guys, in less than a decade with policies for the people. Okay. Social spending as a percentage of the GDP doubled, including large increases in spending on education and healthcare. Educational enrollment increased sharply for ages 17 and under. That's so sad. 17 and under in our culture here in the West is mandatory school. And to hear that them being able to use their own resources made enrollment in education for ages 17 and under, it just breaks my heart and shows that these kind of policies work. They were also spending on higher education, college, as a percent of GDP became the highest. Oh, I'm sorry. And their percent of GDP on higher education became the highest in Latin America during this little bit less than a decade. Average annual growth of income per capita was much higher than the prior 26 years, 1.5 versus 0.6%. And inequality was considerably reduced. Public investment as a percent of GDP more than doubled, and the results were widely appreciated in new roads. You guys, right now in Ecuador, there are places that do not have electricity or running water or roads. There's just mud because it's jungle. It rains all the time. It's like I say, unacceptable. It's unacceptable in it's a very wealthy country when you think of the resources. They have oil and gold and copper and silver and lithium. That's why they're going through what they're going through, because of what is in the land they live on. So not when their investment as a percentage of the GDP more than doubled, and the results were widely appreciated in new roads and hospitals and schools and access to electricity. Rafael Correa was elected president of Ecuador in 2006 and took office in January 2007. A former economy minister who was trained in the United States. I don't know, I think that always a red flag. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything bad. It just makes me stop. And did he go and hang out with the Chicago boys and their way of thinking? You know, that would be something that I would want to know. So I looked into it, and no, he didn't actually. He hung out with people who I can't say yay or nay about. So I guess I have to say I don't know. He set out to fix some of the structural and institutional problems that had kept Ecuador from advancing. That's why he became the leader that he was elected to be. Policy was handicapped by the fact that Ecuador had adopted the US dollar as its currency in 2000, because in 1999 they had a complete financial collapse, and all of the people of the country, not the ruling class and not the government, used the money that Guatemala used. Well, everything fell through. Think about thank you, sir. Mwah. Just brought me my coffee and fresh ground beans. Yep. I'll marry her. I decided right now. I'm gonna fake marry you so hard. Okay, she told me to finish my get back to work. Policy was handicapped by the fact that the Ecuador had adopted the US dollar and its currency. Now, you know, all the people at the bottom, just like when the financial crash happened here, 2007, it's the regular people who lose everything because the banks are betting. They're betting on your money. And if they are to lose, that's your money that's going to be lost. They're going to be just fine. Granted, some of them will go under too, but the ones on top, they're good. They're totally good. And adopting the US dollar now I mean, think about that. If I were to go to, let's just say, Mexico, and I wanted to buy stuff, I have to go exchange my money, unless I am where the tourists are, of course. I have to exchange it to their currency or any country's currency. And the exchange rate, that's why a lot of Americans like to go and retire in countries that are developing, because their money goes further. So Ecuadorians, they're still getting paid the same as they were getting paid before the dollar got accepted. They can't afford anything. It's just really, really effed up so much by that particular banker who is now running for president. The guy who did all this is running for president right now. We'll get to that. He is so corrupt. So that happened in 2000. And this meant that the government couldn't influence its exchange rate at all, and was limited in how much it could use monetary policy. And it reduced the central bank's ability to act as a lender of last resort to the banking system. This meant that the government had to be more efficient and creative and exert more control over the financial system. In 2008, a new a new constitution was approved in a referendum. So that's direct democracy, and the nation voted that they wanted a new constitution. The new constitution was approved, and the central bank, which was previously independent or private, it was now mandated to focus on inflation, and now made part of the government's economic team. This was very important in coordinating an economic policy to plan their economy. The conventional wisdom among most economists, and a pillar of neoliberalism, is that central banks should be independent or private of elected officials. In practice, this usually means that they are unaccountable to the public, but not so independent of powerful financial interests, and can gamble with your money and lose it. A new law in 2009 required banks in Ecuador bring 45% of their liquid assets, don't want to mess that one up, back into Ecuador. This requirement is mandatory, and it will increase to 60%. I'm sorry, it increased to 60% in 2012. So 45% in 2009, and by 2012, it was 60% of their liquid assets had to be brought back into Ecuador in order to do business. I find that fair and not unreasonable. The actual level was more than 80% by 2015. So now you can see why international corporations are getting upset, because they can't extract all of this money out of the ground and keep all of the profits. They have to actually give back to the place that they got the resources from. They have to give back to the people who helped them bring it up from the mines, or if it's gold, or it is a big mining country. They do a lot of mining. These and other reforms that kept dollars in the country were essential to overcoming the new government's first serious challenge. So all this has happened, and they're starting to get money come back in. And the world financial crisis of 2008 happens. And then the world recession of 2009. Ecuador was one of the hardest hit countries in the hemisphere, since oil prices collapsed and the government depended on oil for the majority of its revenue. Another major source of dollars, remittances, mostly money sent home by Ecuadorians working abroad, also collapsed during the recession. This double shock could have caused a prolonged recession or depression, but it didn't. Go figure. It's like, well, then what happened, right? That's me. Well, then what happened, Christy? Tell me. Thanks to a large increase and the increases in government spending and a large stimulus in 2009, the recession lasted just 3 quarters, costing about 1.3% of the GDP. The next big economic shock was the much more prolonged collapse in oil prices that began in the third quarter of 2014. This time, the government was even more creative. In addition to some expansionary fiscal policy, i.e., running bigger budget deficits, the central bank actually engaged in quantitative easing, much as the U.S. Federal Reserve did in response to the recession. Ecuador's central bank created billions of dollars that it lent to the government for spending and also to state-owned banks. This was unexpected for a government that did not even have its own currency, but it proved to be very helpful and aided in the recovery. The most important decision in bringing about Ecuador's current economic recovery was also perhaps its most unorthodox. The government imposed a variety of tariffs on imports under the World Trade Organization's provisions for emergency balance of payments safeguards. This reduction of imports in 2015 through 16 added about 7.6 percentage points to GDP during those years. This counteracted spending cuts that the government had to make as revenues crashed. The government of Korea and his party, it's Alliance PAIS, and I do not speak Spanish, so I'm going to leave it just like that, was thus able to achieve considerable economic and social progress despite 2 recessions caused by serious external shocks coming from other places outside of their nation. Contrary to the Washington narrative, this depended on major institutional reforms, financial regulation, and smart policy choices and planning their government, planning their economy, many of which went against the conventional neoliberal wisdom. Of course, it helped that the president himself had a PhD. He was a doctor in economics and knew what he was doing, and that he had a serious commitment to progressive governments and policies from the beginning. Still, Korea's government had to fight powerful, entrenched interests, including the bankers who owned most of the television media. Sound familiar? When he took office. A referendum in 2011, however, prohibited banks from owning media and vice versa. So, no bank could own any media outlets, and no media outlets could own any banks. And I agree that should be everywhere. Nobody or no company or no corporation or group of people with that much money and power should have a say so of what people see and believe as knowledge. I that's too much power. It's too much power. Everything should be vetted and we should get all of the information, and it should come from investigative journalists, not bankers. But that's my 17 and a half cents. Okay, so the referendum in 2011 that prohibited the banks from owning media and vice versa, that helped to reduce their stranglehold on public debate. But the media have remained a powerful and politicized right-wing force. As in other countries with left governments, i.e. Brazil, where the major media led a successful effort last year to remove the Workers' Party president Dilma Rousseff from office, despite the lack of any impeachable offense. The government's legacy will be tested in an election that just happened this past Sunday on the 7th for president and National Assembly. The candidate of Korea's party is Lenin Moreno, who is well known for his national and international activism for disability rights. He himself has been in a wheelchair since he was shot in a robbery in 1998. Moreno, who is popular with his party and the public and promises to expand upon the economic and social gains of the past decade, is leading in the polls. Moreno's closest opponent is I'm gonna say Mr. Lasso. Guillermo? Guillermo? Okay. Yeah, I'm torturing and butchering it, right? Guillermo Lasso. Not surprisingly, a big banker. Who promises tax cuts, including the elimination of capital gains taxes that will benefit mainly upper income groups. And remember when I told you that there was a guy who helped crash the economy and raked in all those millions while people lost everything? This is him. He's running for president. Lasso lost to Korea in 2013 by a landslide. Next in line is right-wing former Congresswoman Cynthia Viteri, who wants to dismantle some of Korea's main reforms, including restoring the central bank to being private, essentially. She also wants to remove taxes on capital flight, reducing the power of the central government. Moreno needs 40% of the vote, plus at least a 10-point lead on the next runner-up in order to win in the first round. Many pre-election polls in Ecuador are unreliable, but Moreno is generally seen as leading, if not necessarily by enough to win in the first round. So this leftist, overwhelmingly, the nation voted for this person, and a corrupt firm funded by the right-wing candidate, the banker, will produce Ecuador election exit polls. That's who they hired. So the banker, Guillermo Lasso, has been hired. He is a top TV network. He will broadcast the exit polls on February 7th, the presidential election by notoriously corrupt polling firm. It's all in capitals. It's CEDATOS, so Cedatos, which was funded by the main right-wing candidate. So exit polls are being funded by one of the presidential candidates running. No, like, facepalm big time. So even if he were to, the nation wants to win, not the ruling class. Even if he were to have well over 40, which it looked like he did, and the next person was within 10 points, then there would be a runoff. But the next person wasn't within 10 points, so there shouldn't be a runoff. He should be president, but we'll get to that. Many pre-election polls in Ecuador are unreliable, like I said. Why does this election matter? It's a good question. You know, we're all comfy here. Got my coffee. I've got you guys to bitch about a country that I've never been to. Why does it matter? As Noam Chomsky pointed out last month, quote, during this century, Latin America, for the first time in over 500 years, has freed itself from Western imperialism. Last century, That's the American states century. The pink tide is also a rare event in world history. Citizens in developing countries winning economic and social progress through democratic elections. Very few of the development success stories of the 20th century, or even more recently, i.e., China, have been electoral democracies. From 2002 to 2014, the poverty rate for Latin America dropped from 43.9% poverty to 28.2% after rising over the previous 2 decades. So I guess some progress, that's half, almost half, better than nothing. I don't want to go back though. And remember when I said member is a word, okay? I just leave out the first part. Only the cool people say it. Remember when I said that there are bodies in the streets? Okay, so the government has pretty much just stopped working. They have not filled many positions, kind of like Trump did when he said he wanted a skeleton government, if you will, the most minimum he could have on the payroll. He just didn't want things to work. He wanted, if nobody's there to do the job, then the job will not get done. Sorry. I'm my Lord and Savior talks to me. I don't know about you guys. Gotcha, gotcha. Okay. All right. So all of these gains, national sovereignty, social progress, democracy, are all proving tough to hang on to as progressive forces in the region face a slowing world and regional economy, a resurgent right that still controls most of their country's wealth, income, and all of the media, and in some cases, their own economic mistakes. Um, right, they got involved with Venezuela, so that was a big mistake. You guys can look into Ecuador's mistake in Venezuela and read all about that. That's a whole nother story. And if all that weren't enough, there is Washington, D.C., which for the past 16 years has had a simple strategy. I'm sure you guys know what it is. Get rid of all the left governments that we can get rid of and make sure they never come back. And there are, I mean, let's just take a look. I mean, Hillary Clinton admits her role in the Honduran coup aftermath. There's that one. There's so many. John Kerry's meeting with Brazilian officials shows support for illegitimate government. I mean, I can go on and on about the disgusting things that our nation has done to other nations because they didn't agree with their politics. That simple. Nobody's expecting anything better from the US regime, unfortunately. And that was a Pew Research. Nobody expects anything different than regime change all across everywhere, but especially what is considered the Monroe Doctrine, which is the entire Western Hemisphere belongs to the United States. Says who? Says the United States. So I guess it may not get a lot of media attention here. It hasn't. Have you guys heard anything about any of this on the news? If you have, then you're like me and you're super informed and fist bump. It may not get a lot of media attention here, but supporters and opponents of Latin America's moves towards independence and progressive government in the 21st century will be following this election. I will be following this election, and therefore you guys will know all about this election. So what I do know is it's very secretive. Now, Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton were able to go to Bolivia when they had their election. And they could, as we can here, go to what are they called? Where you go cast your ballot. Election centers. Oh, just for a lack of like for a brain fart. And you can go and watch. You can, you can't go into the booth with them. That's creepy. Don't ever do that. But you can make sure that because it's an open, transparent, democratic process. In Bolivia, they were able to do the same thing. Well, that's not how it is in Ecuador. Everything is behind closed doors. So nobody knows what's what. And what they're saying is he didn't have enough votes, so there has to be a runoff. But there's also Americans saying things like, that's going to be your next president, or in so and so's administration in the future, which I mean, I say things like that when Bernie hadn't dropped out, well, when Bernie's the president. So I'm not, judging that. It's just that there is a history and there is a pattern of this type of regime change, this kind of a democratically elected leader who happens to have different politics than the center right ruling class here in the States. And it's not allowed. We will not allow other countries to do them. They have to do us the way we want them to. And we're seeing more and more and more and more and more of it. So the guy that they want to win I don't know. Let's see. Probably you can't even see him on there and the light's too bright. Anyway, he can't top or go over 8% in polling. So I don't see how it would be a real, true, free and fair election if someone who cannot get past 8% to win, when right now we have someone who already has 43.22%. And all these programs were brought in to do all these wonderful things. And of course, we meddled, and other countries meddled as well. We are not solely the only meddlers. There was France and Brazil, and I mean, I could go on. You guys should really look into the story because Ecuador, the geolocation of it and the resources that are in it. I mean, think about the Galapagos Islands, and come on, we're science nerds. We've read Charles um, Darwin and how the finches there just kind of revolutionized his mind and the way he thought, and it holds a spot in our heart too. Well, the Galapagos is known in Ecuador as what do we call those huge boats for the military? There, you land your planes on them. It's pretty much a base, an Air Force base or a Marine base. They're massive. Well, that's what they call the Galapagos Islands because we have a base on it. That's crazy. I didn't know that. And why do we need one there? Why can't we just leave it beautiful? And I can't imagine that it's being taken care of the way that it should. So let's see. My other story is going to be the not so good. I do want to say that after all those policies started working and someone else got elected in, the Union of South American Nations is like the African Union. And I actually, Stacy brought me tissue. I just needed to take a break. I'm going to pause this in case anyone's using earbuds and because I'm just not going to be gross like that. Ta-da! Oh, wait. Um, so the Union of South American Nations, UNICER, was a way of, we have United Nations and the European Union, and then there's the African Union, which are all good things where people can use diplomacy to work out their own problems and their own economies and plan their economies and work together in solidarity. Well, that guy said no and took them out of that and decided that any country that was previously working with the previous administration to better the economy and way of life for Ecuadorians by using their resources was now their enemy. So Russia was their enemy, China's their enemy, Cuba's their enemy, Venezuela's their enemy. And that just leaves an isolated country. That's the point. That's the point. So that was pretty scary. Just almost creating a false Cold War. We've got to be afraid of all of these countries because their social programs are helping people. Sorry, it's not funny. It's just ridiculous. It really is. Okay, we need good people to be elected into powerful positions. And I would love to be able to say and believe it without a doubt that power does not corrupt all. But I can't say that. So there needs to be a way that we can elect people and make sure that they are accountable. What way could we do that? Maybe not letting money be in politics? Yeah, I think so too, Mac. Tomorrow when he sees this, that's probably when he's going to say, yep, that's what I was thinking. So that one was for you, Mac. Getting money out of politics would definitely not eliminate, but pretty close. It would be the only reason would be to keep their job, which a lot of politicians want to keep their job. That's why they say what they say and then don't do what they say. However, if money was completely eliminated, they got their salary and that's it. There cannot be any more. They cannot accept donations. It's not lobbying is a word that was created because bribery sounds illegal because it is. So, and that's my opinion on lobbying. I do believe that it is legal bribing, legalized bribing. Okay. So, Ben Norton, an investigative journalist, is spending a few weeks in Ecuador. He was planning on witnessing this election and wrapping it up and coming home because of the way that it was looking. It was looking as though there was going to be a winner with enough of the percentage to not have to have a runoff. So, Ben Norton traveled to Ecuador to report on the historic February 7th election, which pits a wealthy US-backed right-wing banker against a left-wing economist who pledges to continue the socialist citizens revolution launched by former President Rafael Correa. I really do hope I'm not butchering these names so bad. I'm white and I'm trying. In this dispatch, working class Ecuadorians explain why they support leftist candidates Andres Arauz and oppose the repressive Washington allied government of Lenin Moreno. And there is a video to that, and I will share that right now with you guys. It is copied because I really think that it's a little bit less than 15 minutes, and it's there in Ecuador. It's wonderful, informative, and you get to hear from the people, which is the most important. That the people are what make up Ecuador, not the ruling class and not the governments. The government would not exist without the people. So let's go back. All right. The South American nation of Ecuador is currently suffering through its worst economic crisis in decades. Poverty is skyrocketing, corruption is rampant, and the US-backed government has shown itself to be deeply undemocratic. Who knew? On February 7th, Ecuador held an historic election that could have fundamentally changed its direction, moving the nation away from its current neoliberal policies and reliance on Washington and its subsidies and the IMF, and restoring the socialist-oriented programs of former President Rafael Correa, who launched a progressive movement called the Citizens' Revolution. Today, Ecuador's sitting president, Lenin Moreno, has a mere 8% approval rating, with a staggering, wait for it, 91% disapproval. People didn't just leave the like we approve or check the approval. They went and disapproved. They made sure that they checked that disapproval. 91% of people polled disapprove of this president, making him the most unpopular leader in the country's modern history. Under Moreno's rule, the government has imprisoned and exiled many left-wing political leaders, banned pro-Korea electoral candidates from running. Like, that's insane. You don't agree with the same politics as I, so you're no longer allowed to even participate. You can't even run. And he's getting away with it. He's gutted social programs, destabilized Latin American regional institutions, and heavily, I mean heavily, indebted Ecuadorians people and their generations to come with billions and billions of dollars in loans. And in a historic act of betrayal, Moreno renounced the asylum that Correa had given to WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange, allowing the British authorities to enter Ecuador's sovereign embassy in London and arrest the Australian journalist. Under Moreno's reign, unemployment, inequality, and hardship have reached peak levels, with more than 58% of Ecuadorians living in poverty and nearly 39% in extreme poverty, according to United Nations University study. Meanwhile, Ecuadorians have endured a catastrophic response to the COVID-19 pandemic, with one of the highest per capita death rates in the entire world. In 2020, Ecuador's GDP shrunk by an estimated 11%. Everywhere you walk in the capital city of Quito, you see for sale and for rent signs in building windows and on building doors. Change my position. Okay, a little bit more comfortable. US-backed banker versus grassroots socialist economist. Guess we'll see. Ecuador's February 7th election did boil down to two main choices, and the difference could not be any starker. On one side is the right wing candidate, Guillermo Lasso, a banker who served as an economic minister when Ecuador suffered through the financial meltdown in 1999 that bankrupted millions of citizens and destroyed their life savings. Lasso, who has long been credibly accused of corruption and the use of an offshore tax shelter, S at the end, tax shelters, my bad, has the staunch support of Ecuador's wealthy economic elites and the ruling class and the United States of America. On the other side is the left-wing candidate Andres Arauz, Arauz. I really wish I knew how to pronounce it when I look at it. So it's Andres Arauz. It arouses me. I'm silly. Sorry. Arauz. Maybe it's Arauz. I will work on my pronouncing his name because he is actually going to be something that I'm going to follow up on until this is all over, or even after. I really am enjoying this pink tide that is washing its way through Central and South America with policies for the people. You know, I'm about it. I'm like, so I will be following that. He is a young economist who has his PhD and who follows in the footsteps of the former president Correa, who put in all those policies that helped all those peoples. And not only does he follow in the former president's footsteps, he also wants to continue that president's movement. He is a member of the movement and supports that movement. And that movement is known as Charismo. So I can pronounce that, and I was very proud, so I was waiting to use that. And he wants to bring back his socialist policies. That's what Charismo is about. Arauz has built a huge grassroots following in a presidential campaign based on his promises to tax the rich, to give $1,000 checks to 1 million people, the poor and working class families, and to abandon suffocating and extremely unpopular economic agreements that Ecuador's current Moreno government signed with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, or the country butt rapers. I don't know how else to call them. This is what they do. Look into the IMF if you're not familiar. It's not a moral corporation. We'll leave it at that. Maybe one of these weeks I'll do a deep dive into the IMF, but I will definitely be on a list if I do that. If I'm not already. I probably am already. All right, so Arauz also plans to revive the regional institutions to integrate Ecuador's economy with other Latin American countries. And why wouldn't you want to? Diplomacy is everything. He wants to return to closer business ties with China, just as his mentor Correa had done. Virtually all polls show that Arauz is leading and likely to win the presidential election if the vote is free and clear. Free and fair. Clear. Free and fair. The fact that the leading presidential candidate wants to reject the IMF and seek deeper economic relations with Beijing has angered Washington. Who thought that would happen? Which has meddled in Ecuador's international affairs and thrown its weight behind the banker Lasso. Lenin Moreno's war on Ecuador's left. Under the US-backed Lenin Moreno administration, Ecuador has attacked regional institutions withdrawing from the Bolivarian Alliance, or ALBA, a trade bloc of left-wing Latin American countries, and taking Ecuador out of the Union of South American Nations, like I had mentioned earlier, or UNASUR is what it's called, kicking out the international body's Quito-based headquarters, while overseeing widespread corruption and looting of the public money. The Moreno government also ensnared Ecuador with billions of dollars in loans from the IMF, because he doesn't have to pay it back. The people of Ecuador have to pay it back over generations. Their great grandchildren will be paying back these corrupt loans. And as part of an austerity package demanded by the IMF, like, you're not going to get this loan unless you sign this. Well, in that package, Moreno announced in 2019 a series of aggressive neoliberal reforms, which included cutting 23,000 state sector jobs and ending longtime fuel subsidies, which nearly doubled the price of gasoline. And guess what? People can't afford gas now. So the one of the dudes running for president, his name is Carlos Perez, but he has changed his name. He's not these two I'm talking about right now. He's changed his name. He's pretending to go back to his indigenous roots or something. He grew his hair long. He changed his name. And he has all these campaign videos of him riding a bike, like, it's better for the planet if we don't have gas, kind of thing. Like, don't worry about fixing it. Anyway, I thought that was funny. And you can find them. Look up Carlos Perez. Ecuador's Carlos Perez's transformation. I was looking for the right word there. The proposed austerity package kicked off a massive uprising in October 2019, which is now getting close to where we are. And I'm sure you guys remember that massive uprising in 2019. Labor unions organized strikes, while indigenous groups and students held massive protests that brought the country to a halt. The Moreno government responded with brutal violence. Police shot protesters with real bullets, killing several, injuring more than 1,000, and detaining another 1,000. The Carista movement decided to close its electoral campaign this February 4th at the park in the heart of the capital, Quito, known as the Parque del Arbolito. Yay. This location was deeply symbolic because it was here that the uprising against Moreno's neoliberal reforms started in October 2019. Charismo and the Citizens' Revolution. Rafael Correa remains the most popular politician in Ecuador. In his 10 years as president, from 2007 to 2017, Ecuador's poverty rate plummeted, the minimum wage increased rapidly, and the government invested billions of dollars in universal health care, education, and advanced infrastructure. It was on its way to putting roads everywhere instead of having massive areas without any roads, electricity, or water still. While Ecuador is still a developing, formerly colonized nation, it has significant natural resources that could make this country very rich. These include a substantial amount of oil and mineral reserves, such as gold, silver, and copper. Now, can you start to see a picture that I've been painting? For decades, these resources were monopolized by a small handful of Ecuadorian oligarchs. Correa was the first leader to use the country's plentiful natural resources to instead fund popular social programs. Korea also pursued an independent foreign policy, strengthening relationships with China and Russia, collaborating closely with other socialist governments in Latin America, and committing Ecuador to political and economic integration with its neighbors, saying, we are all in this together, solidarity. How can we help you? And how can you help us? Let's do this together. Korea spoke with the Gray Zone editor-in-chief Max Blumenthal in December about the stakes of that election that just happened on the 7th. In Ecuador, the rule of law has been permanently broken, he said. They seized the state with a completely fraudulent, manipulated consultation in the absence of a constitutional control. Using the same methods, they took control of the council that appoints all the supervisory authorities. The government of Ecuador is totally submitted to the interests of the government in the United States. Above all else, to try to preserve progressive leaders and try to threaten the stability of Venezuela. That is evident. So they are really desperate, he said. They are capable of anything right now because for them, the worst thing that can happen is that we win, the socialists, because they know that they will have to face justice. We are not vengeful people. We we are not vengeful people, but justice must be done without hatred, but with memory and acknowledgement. I love that. I ask the world to be very attentive to what is happening in Ecuador in these elections, please. They're such a small country, and if they knew that the world was on their side, they would be unstoppable and have that little bit of uh, almost like handing them a little bit of bravery. I think that that's very important. Under Korea's leadership, Korea, not the country, Korea's leadership, Ecuador launched the Progressive Citizens Revolution, which fundamentally, as I said before, transformed the country and is still a powerful force today. At the rallies in the country's two biggest cities, Quito and, oh, Guayaquil, I hope I said that right. Working class Ecuadorians showed their undying support for this revolution still to this day. From Correa's vice president to his anti democratic persecutor, Lenin Moreno once served as Rafael Correa's vice president. He won the 2017 presidential election precisely by claiming to follow in the footsteps of Correa and feigning fidelity to the citizens' revolution. But quickly did a political 180, betraying the Charisma movement and turning hard to the right. With backing from the United States, Moreno formed alliances with corrupt oligarchs and bankers in Ecuador, implementing aggressive neoliberal economic policies, privatizing large parts of the economy, and gutting social programs that helped the most needy among them. The publication of leaked documents known as the INA papers, give them a look, they will blow your mind. The INA papers offered insight into the Moreno government's extreme corruption, showing how the leader has used offshore bank accounts in Panama to siphon millions and millions of dollars out of the public coffers, which means tax money from the people. While overseeing this looting of a state, the Moreno administration ironically accused Correa of corruption, slapping the leftist leader with dozens of politically motivated, unsubstantiated charges. Moreno even imprisoned Carrero's other former vice president, Jorge Glass, on spurious accusations. Glass has remained incarcerated in Ecuador's notorious Lada Chunga prison, even after a 52-day hunger strike where he almost died and had to go to the hospital. It nearly killed him. Throughout the 2021 electoral process, the Moreno government has placed obstacle after obstacle to try to prevent this leftist Caristas, brain fart, the leftist Caristas from returning to power. The Moreno administration blocked Correa from running as a vice presidential candidate. It also banned Andres Arauz's political party from participating, forcing the Caristas movement to instead register with a little-known party. They just blocked an entire political party because they didn't like their politics. The National Electoral Council, the CNE, which was politicized by the Moreno government and is controlled by the country's right wing, even declared that left-wing candidates were not allowed to use images of Correa in their ads and political campaign material. Like, you're not allowed to show him because he's too popular and his policies will help the people and we can't even let them see his face. Out of sight, out of mind. I don't know. At the same time, Ecuadorians living abroad who are overwhelmingly supporters of Charisma have faced obstacles in the election as well. The CNE has made it difficult for expats to vote. I bet they have. Mere days before the vote, the CNA similarly sought to revoke the electoral observer credentials for a Spanish member of European Parliament and a Spanish political scientist because of their left-wing political ties. So these two, because they have left-wing ties, were turned away from being able to observe the election to make sure it was free and fair. So that right there should tell you a lot all by itself. Right-wing media outlets in Latin America have also played key roles in the anti-democratic crackdown. Colombia and Argentine newspapers owned by wealthy conservative oligarchs kicked off a disinformation campaign, spreading fake news accusing Aruz of taking money from Colombia's socialist guerrilla group in ELN. And that is just ridiculous. I can't even, if you knew anything about none of that's true. It's just blatant lies. These unsubstantiated stories were near carbon copies of propaganda drive from several years before that was weaponized against Correa, falsely accusing him of taking money from Colombia's socialist guerrilla group. So they just took a letter and took out one person's name and put it in another one's and sent that out. So, wow. While his government was busy clamping down on the left in Ecuador, Lenin Moreno himself was in the United States just 2 weeks before the election. He visited D.C. for several days. Moreno had a series of meetings with powerful figures, including the following: the director for the Western Hemisphere of the U.S. National Security Council, Juan Sebastian Gonzalez, a special assistant to President Joe Biden, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, OAS, Luis Almagro, who helped oversee a coup against Bolivia's democratically elected socialist government. Do you see where we're going? Biden has a whole team of people who are so pro regime change. The director of the IMF, Christina Georgieva, that's really funny. I'm not making fun of her name. Okay, I am. It's really funny. hawkish U.S. Senators Bob Mendez and Ben Cardin, and the president of the Inter-American Development Bank. I'm just going to say Claver Carone because her first name or his first name is way too big. During this junket, the Ecuadorian presidential office produced several slick videos lavishing praise on the United States and showing Moreno smiling with his political and economic sponsors in Washington. Overseers have warned that Moreno's meetings may have been aimed at rigging the election or at least making more anti-democratic obstacles to prevent Caristas a victory. Nearly all polls show leftist candidate Andres Arauz easily winning Ecuador's February 7th election, yet the Ecuadorian media's reliance on a corrupt firm funded by right-wing candidate Guillermo Lasso, who's running for president, who is the banker who caused or helped cause that financial crash in 1999, to produce exit polls after the vote, is one of many signs of potential irregularities or meddling. The Ecuadorian people, however, seem ready to fight. The massive turnouts for the Carista movements and demonstrations in major cities, with tens of thousands of working class people flooding into the streets and into the cities. They're just regular working class people who are ready to do what needs to be done to make sure that these elections are as free and fair as possible in a very corrupt, non-transparent situation. I would say that it reflects a popular outrage in the country, seeing that many people, and that makes my heart happy because that means that they're informed. Even with the state owning all the media, they are still informed. And a widespread yearning to return to a citizens' revolution is, I mean, they're ready. So I know that was a lot of information. I know I took it back a little bit and I didn't take it back as far as I do in some of my stories, like 1902. But it's important. I mean, how many of us today, when we woke up, said, "I wonder what's happening in Ecuador"? Probably not too many Americans, and it's important that we know because this country wants to be a sovereign nation, and it has been colonized just as the United States has been. And I show and feel such empathy for people who just want the right thing. They want to be on the right side of history. They want torture to not happen. They want basic needs for their fellow brethren, sisters and brothers, our fellow human species, and all of the sentient beings that live on this planet with us to live a decent life and to know that bankers can just gamble away at regular people's money and regular people can lose everything and that banker can be just fine and then run for president is unacceptable to me. There's a lot I still have to learn about Ecuador. I encourage anyone who watches this or listens to this and wants to correct me on anything, please make sure that you have sources for me to go to. Don't just tell me I'm wrong or that I'm a dirty commie or something, or do. I mean, it gives me a good giggle. But if you do want to have an honest conversation on something that I did get wrong or that I didn't quite understand, please feel free to either private message me or comment underneath the video and we can get down. You can correct me. And I would rather be right after being corrected. I would just rather be right, whether being corrected or not. I don't want to be wrong. So my story tonight was a lot, and I appreciate all of you guys for being here. I hope that I enlightened you on something that is not too far away from us. I'm in Florida, like you guys know, and it's I feel like Florida is kind of part of that Central America. At least the people that I know. I have Colombian friends, and I have Cuban friends, and Puerto Rican friends, and I mean friends from Guatemala. I have Nicaragua. There's Venezuela, Brazil, Chile. We're all here together, and all we have is each other. So I think that it's a good thing to look into these things. And I have much more to learn. If you guys have anything you want to share with me that maybe I don't know and would need to know to better understand the situation that's going on there. I do know that they are having the next election in April, and so I will bring you the information as it comes in. And I guess I love you guys. Happy Friday. Mac, I love you. I hope you feel better. Get lots of rest. Can't be beautiful if you don't get beauty sleep. That's what I heard. So, Nacha, thank you so much. You're wonderful. And we couldn't do this without you. And everybody in the chat, Brant, that's awesome. I didn't know if you were going to be able to make it tonight. I know my dad's here, but my dad's my biggest fan. So there's that. Don't be jealous because your daddy's not at your show. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. I'm bragging. Bragging is not that cute. But when you're bragging that your daddy comes to your show, it's kind of adorable. And that's a fact. It's objectively a fact. Thanks, Dad, for showing up. And Carlos, Lord Bryant, and I love you guys. I do. And I want to say, gosh darn it, stay humanist for godless sakes.